"I don't know that man," Eric said into the microphone. "He's not my father." The world around me froze. Laughter died in people's throats. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every guest in that grand wedding hall turned to look at me. I sat in the front row, where I was supposed to be. I had been invited. I had been involved in every step of my son's life. I had even helped pay for this wedding. And yet, here he was, standing beneath the golden chandeliers, beside the woman he was about to marry, erasing me like I was nothing. The microphone crackled in the silence. "I was raised by my mother alone," Eric continued, his voice steady, his expression unreadable. "She did everything for me. She sacrificed for me. And today, I want to honor her." The guests clapped politely as my ex-wife, Linda, dabbed at fake tears and stood from her seat. She walked toward the altar with the grace of a queen, placing a hand over her heart like she had just received the greatest honor of her life. I barely heard the applause. Blood roared in my ears. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some poorly worded speech. This was planned. I gripped the arms of my chair, my fingers digging into the polished wood. My mind raced. I had fought for Eric. I had been there for him. Every baseball game, every school play, every scraped knee. I had never abandoned him, no matter how much Linda tried to push me out of his life. And yet, here he was, acting as if I had never existed. I should have stood up. I should have said something. I should have stopped this lie from spreading through the room like wildfire. But I couldn't move. I could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me. Some guests shot me confused glances, others whispered behind their hands. A few smirked like they had known this was coming. And Linda, she turned just slightly, just enough for me to see the smallest smirk tug at the corner of her lips. That was when I knew. She had done this. She had been waiting for this moment. The priest's voice broke through my thoughts. And now, the groom and his mother will share a special moment before the vows. I looked up just in time to see Linda reach into her pocket and pull something out. A folded piece of cloth. The breath left my lungs. She unfolded it slowly, dramatically, revealing an old, embroidered handkerchief with Eric's initials stitched into the corner. The same handkerchief I had given him when he was 13. I remembered that day so clearly. He had been nervous before his first big baseball game, and I had handed him that handkerchief, telling him that real men face their fears. He had carried it in his pocket for years after that. Now, Linda held it up as if it had been hers all along. "This was a gift from my father," she said, her voice trembling with well-rehearsed emotion. He was the only father figure Eric ever knew. A collective murmur of admiration swept through the crowd. Someone even sighed. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I wasn't just erased from today, I was being erased from the past. I needed to get out of there. If I stayed, I'd make a scene. And that's exactly what Linda wanted. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. A few guests turned to look at me, but I didn't care. I forced myself to keep my face neutral, my steps measured, my breathing steady. I walked out of the wedding hall. The moment I stepped outside, the cold evening air hit me like a slap. But it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside me. I made it halfway down the steps before I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Dad." I turned sharply, but it wasn't Eric. It was my brother, Tom. He looked just as shaken as I felt. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. "Did you know this was going to happen?" I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "Not a damn clue." Tom exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is messed up. I mean, I knew Linda was bad, but this?" I clenched my fists. "She's been feeding him lies for years, hasn't she?" Tom hesitated, then nodded. "I tried to tell you. I heard things from mutual friends. But I didn't think Eric actually believed all of it." I felt a surge of anger. At Linda, at Eric, at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I let her twist things so far that my own son didn't recognize the truth anymore? Tom hesitated before saying, "You're not just going to let this go, right?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, hell no." Linda thought she had one. She thought she had rewritten history. But she forgot one thing. The truth has a way of coming out. And I was about to make damn sure of it. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The street outside the wedding venue was quiet, but inside, the celebration continued. Laughter, music, and clinking glasses echoed from behind the doors. My son was inside, pretending I didn't exist. Tom sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone. "You want to know the worst part?" he muttered. "A bunch of them knew. This wasn't just Linda's idea. She's been planting this for years. People at the wedding weren't even surprised." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "What do you mean?" He turned the phone screen toward me. It was a private Facebook group, a wedding planning page, where Linda had been posting updates. And right there, in a post from months ago, she had written, "Eric has made the decision to honor the only parent who was ever there for him. This wedding will be a celebration of the truth. Those who don't belong in our lives won't be acknowledged." The comments were filled with support. Messages from her friends, relatives, and even people I recognized from the wedding. They all agreed with her. I scrolled through, feeling something in my stomach twist. People I had once considered family had been feeding into this lie for months. The entire wedding was built on a rewritten version of reality, and Eric had accepted it without question. I slammed the phone down. She planned this from the start. She wanted to humiliate me. Tom exhaled. "You can't let her win." I knew he was right, but what the hell was I supposed to do? Storm back in there and start yelling? Demand Eric acknowledge me in front of everyone? That would only make me look worse. Linda had already painted a picture of me as some absent, uncaring father. If I lost my temper, I'd only prove her right. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to Eric. Alone." Tom frowned. "You really think he's going to listen?" I didn't know, but I had to try. I waited. The wedding stretched into the night. Guests filtered out in groups, drunk and laughing. Eventually, Eric and his new wife, Sarah, emerged. They were saying their goodbyes, thanking guests for coming. Linda was still glued to Eric's side. I didn't move until Sarah stepped away to talk to her bridesmaids, and for a brief moment, Eric was alone. I walked straight up to him. He saw me coming, and something in his face shifted. Not surprise, annoyance. "Eric," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." He sighed. "Dad, not now." I ignored the way that single word, Dad, felt like an insult coming from him. "This won't take long." He crossed his arms. "Fine. What do you want?" "I want to know why." He frowned. "Why what?" "Why you let your mother erase me from your life." His jaw tightened. "Look, I don't owe you an explanation. This is my wedding. My day. I don't need to justify my choices to you." I stared at him, searching for something, anything, that told me he didn't really mean this, that he was just caught up in the moment. But there was nothing. "Eric, I was there for you. Your whole life. I never left. I never abandoned you." He scoffed. "That's not what Mom says." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "And you believe her? Without question?" He looked away. "She never lied to me." I almost laughed. Linda had never lied to him? That was rich. But arguing that point now wouldn't help. "I don't know what she told you, but it's not the truth," I said. "I was there. I fought for you. I never missed a single." "It doesn't matter," he cut me off. "You were there, but you were never really there. You showed up, sure, but did you ever put me first?" I reeled back. "What the hell does that mean?" His expression darkened. "You moved on. You started a new family. And there it was. I had remarried 5 years after the divorce. I had another son, a 10-year-old boy named Ryan. Eric had always been distant from him, but I never thought it was resentment. I never thought he saw it as a betrayal. "That doesn't mean I loved you any less," I said. "Eric, I tried." "You tried," he repeated, his voice sharp. "But trying wasn't enough." I opened my mouth, but before I could say another word, Linda appeared. She placed a hand on Eric's arm, her expression full of false concern. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" Eric sighed, glancing at her. "Yeah, we're done here." She looked at me then, victory written all over her face. I clenched my fists. "This isn't over, Eric." He didn't even look back as he walked away. I stood there, watching as my own son disappeared into the night, and realized something. Linda didn't just poison him against me. She made him believe he never needed me at all. This wasn't something I could fix with one conversation. This ran deeper than I had thought. I had two choices: accept it and let him go, or fight to prove the truth. And I wasn't the kind of man who walked away without a fight. I wasn't going to let Linda win. Eric had been poisoned against me for years, and I had been blind to it. I had ignored the signs, brushed off the small things, assumed he would see through her lies when he got older. But I had underestimated how deep her manipulation ran. I wasn't going to argue with him in public. I wasn't going to beg for his attention. I was going to do something Linda never expected. I was going to prove, beyond a doubt, that she had been lying to him his entire life. The next day, I started digging. I went through old court records, custody agreements, emails, anything that showed how hard I had fought for him. I found receipts for every child support payment, every birthday gift, every school event I attended. I even found old text messages from Linda, ones where she had tried to keep me from seeing Eric out of spite. I wasn't sure how I was going to use it yet, but I needed everything. I needed proof. I reached out to people who knew us back then, old neighbors, family members, even Eric's former teachers. Some of them were hesitant to get involved, but others were more than willing to talk. Most of them had seen how Linda treated me after the divorce. They knew the truth. But none of it mattered if Eric refused to listen. I needed an opening, something that would make him question her version of events. And then, something happened that I never expected. Sarah, Eric's wife, called me. I was surprised she even had my number, but I answered immediately. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious. "I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" I hesitated. "I've been better." She sighed. "Listen, I know what happened at the wedding was a lot. I didn't know Eric was going to do that. He didn't tell me. That caught my attention." "You didn't know?" "No. I knew he had issues with you, but he never told me he was planning to cut you out like that. I found out when everyone else did." I waited. She had called for a reason. "I don't know what's true and what's not," she admitted. "But I do know that Eric has only ever told me one side of the story. And I think," she hesitated, "I think he's afraid to hear anything else." I gripped the phone tighter. "Do you believe what Linda told him?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't think he's as sure as he pretends to be." That was all I needed to hear. "If I send you something," I said, "will you look at it? Just look. No pressure." A long pause. Then, "Okay." I hung up and immediately sent her what I had gathered. The old custody battle records, the proof of my involvement, the texts where Linda had tried to keep me away. I didn't expect an immediate response, so I focused on my next move. I needed to see Eric face to face, without Linda interfering. I knew where he worked. I wasn't going to ambush him, but I could wait outside. If he wanted to ignore me, that was his choice. But I wasn't going to let him say I never tried. I arrived at his office just before lunch. I stayed in my car, watching the entrance. Sure enough, a little after noon, he walked out. Alone. I got out and called his name. He stopped. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't walk away. That was something. "What do you want?" His tone was exhausted, irritated. I walked up, stopping a few feet away. "I want 5 minutes." He crossed his arms. "Dad." "5 minutes," I repeated. "Then I'll leave you alone." He exhaled sharply. "Fine. 5 minutes." I took out my phone and pulled up one of the court documents, the one that showed I had fought for joint custody. I held it out. "Read it." He frowned. "I don't need to." "You do," I interrupted, "because this is the truth. Not what Linda told you. This." He hesitated, then took the phone. I watched his eyes move over the screen. His frown deepened. "I paid child support every month," I said. "I fought for equal custody. Your mother made it as hard as possible, but I never gave up." He scrolled through the document, his grip tightening. "Look at the dates," I continued. "I never left. I never stopped trying. Linda wanted you to believe that, but it's not true." Eric's face was unreadable, but I saw the small cracks forming. He wasn't dismissing it immediately. That meant something. "Why now?" he asked. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I thought you already knew," I said. "I thought you would see through her." I was wrong. His jaw clenched. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, He handed the phone back. I need time, he muttered. That was more than I expected. Take all the time you need, I said. But don't take her word for it. Find out for yourself. He nodded stiffly, then turned and walked away. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Linda's version of the story had just taken its first real hit, and I wasn't stopping until Eric knew the full truth. Eric didn't call. He didn't text. For 2 weeks, I waited, unsure if he was thinking things over or if he had chosen to ignore everything I showed him. I told myself I had planted a seed, but doubt crept in. Linda had spent years twisting the truth. Could a few court documents and texts really undo all of that? Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. Eric talked to his mom. It didn't go well. I sat up immediately. What happened? He confronted her about the custody stuff. She flipped out, started crying, screaming, saying you were manipulating him. He's upset. He doesn't know what to believe. This was exactly what I expected Linda to do. The moment she felt control slipping, she'd make herself the victim. And Eric, who had spent years believing she was the only one who ever cared about him, would struggle to separate the truth from guilt. Is he okay? I don't know. He left the house after their argument. He didn't say where he was going. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. If he contacts me, I'll let you know. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I kept my phone close, checking it constantly. Nothing. Then, in the afternoon, a number called that I didn't recognize. I answered immediately. Dad. It was Eric. His voice was quiet, tense. I need to see you, he said. Are you home? I forced my voice to stay steady. Yeah, come over. I barely had time to process before he arrived. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. He walked past me without a word and sat on the couch. I sat across from him and waited. He leaned forward, rubbing his hands together, staring at the floor. I don't know what's real anymore, he muttered. I thought I knew. I thought Mom was telling me the truth. But when I asked her about the custody stuff, she lost it. She told me not to believe anything you said, that you were twisting things to make yourself look good. Did she deny it? I asked. He hesitated. Not really. She just kept saying it was more complicated than I understood. I nodded. That's because she knows if you look too closely, everything she told you will fall apart. He exhaled, shaking his head. I don't get it. Why would she lie about this? Why would she make me believe you abandoned me? Because she wanted to punish me. Because she wanted to be the only person you relied on. Because the truth didn't fit the story she built around herself. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, I don't know, Eric. I wish I did. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands. I feel like an idiot. I spent my whole life hating you for something you didn't even do. That's not your fault, I said. You trusted the person who raised you. That's normal. He dropped his hands, looking at me for the first time. How do I fix this? I shook my head. I can't tell you that. You have to decide what happens next. He nodded slowly, like he understood. Then he frowned. There's something else. What? I think Mom knew I would find out eventually. I narrowed my eyes. Why do you say that? Because she already had an excuse ready. She told me that even if you weren't a deadbeat, you still replaced me with your new family. That you cared about Ryan more than you ever cared about me. I clenched my jaw. That's not true. Then why did it feel like it? He shot back. For the first time, his anger wasn't just about Linda. It was about me. And he wasn't wrong. After the divorce, I had fought for him. But as the years passed and Linda kept pushing him further away, I had let the distance grow. I told myself I was giving him space. I told myself I didn't want to make things harder. But maybe, in doing that, I had made him feel like I had given up on him. I never replaced you, I said. But maybe I should have fought harder. He stared at me for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. I need time, he said. I understand. He stood up. I walked him to the door, not sure if this was the last time I'd see him for a while, or if this was the beginning of fixing things. But before he left, he turned back. I'm sorry, Dad. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had my son back. Eric didn't reach out for another week. I gave him space, even though every part of me wanted to check in, to see if he was okay, to know what was going on in his head. But I knew pushing him too soon could undo everything. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "He wants to meet with you," she said. "But not at your house. He doesn't want Mom to know." That told me everything I needed to know. Eric wasn't just questioning things anymore. He was afraid of what would happen if Linda found out. "Where?" I asked. "There's a diner near our place. Tomorrow night at 7. I'll be there." The next evening I parked outside the diner 10 minutes early. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat there, watching the entrance, unsure if Eric would actually show up. Sarah had said he would, but I knew how easy it was to back out of something like this. He wasn't just meeting me. He was admitting, to himself and to me, that everything he had believed for years might have been a lie. At exactly 7, his car pulled into the lot. He got out, hesitated for a moment, then walked inside. I followed a few seconds later. He had chosen a booth near the window, away from the bulk of the crowd, but not completely hidden. He was sitting stiffly, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. I sat down across from him. "Hey," I said. "Hey." A waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee. Neither of us spoke while she poured it. When she finally walked away, Eric exhaled and leaned forward. "I talked to my grandparents," he said. "I hadn't expected that." Linda's parents had always supported her, or at least they had never openly challenged her. If Eric had gone to them, it meant he was really looking for answers. "And?" I asked. "They told me you were right." His voice was flat, emotionless. "They said Mom made it impossible for you to see me, that she hated even hearing your name, that she would get angry if they mentioned you." That hit harder than I expected. I had known Linda was bitter after the divorce, but I didn't realize she had taken it that far. Eric shook his head, staring down at his coffee. "I feel like an idiot." "You're not," I said immediately. He scoffed. "Aren't I? I spent years believing everything she said. I told people my father abandoned me. I told myself I didn't need you. And the whole time, I was wrong." I leaned forward. "Eric, you were a kid. You trusted your mother. That's not stupid, that's normal." He let out a slow breath. I confronted her again. I stiffened. "What happened?" "She lost it." His grip on the coffee cup tightened. "She screamed at me, told me I was ungrateful, that I was turning on her after everything she sacrificed for me. She said if I believed you, I wasn't her son anymore." I clenched my jaw. That was exactly what I had feared. Linda didn't just manipulate Eric, she controlled him. And now that she felt that control slipping, she was doing what she always did, making herself the victim. "What did you say?" I asked carefully. "I told her I needed time." He laughed bitterly. "Not that it mattered. She's barely spoken to me since. Sarah says she's been calling people, telling them I've changed, that I'm being brainwashed. She's trying to control the narrative," I said. "She knows you're slipping away, so she's making sure everyone thinks she's the victim before you can tell them the truth." Eric shook his head. "I don't get it. Why go this far? Why lie for so long?" "She didn't want to be wrong," I said. "If she admitted the truth, she would have to admit that she kept us apart for no reason, that she put herself before what was best for you. And that's not something she can handle." Eric sat with that for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this." I hesitated before speaking. "Eric, I never wanted you to choose between us. I don't want you to hate your mother." His head snapped up. "How can you say that? After everything she did to you?" "Because she's still your mother," I said. "And I don't want to do to you what she did to me. I don't want to be another person telling you how to feel." He stared at me for a long time. "That's not what I expected you to say." I shrugged. "You're an adult. You get to decide what happens next." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't even know where to start." "Then don't rush it," I said. "Take your time. Figure out what you want." He was silent for a while, then he nodded. "Okay." I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know if Eric would cut Linda off completely or if he would try to salvage his relationship with her. I didn't know if we would fall back into silence or if we could build something new. But for the first time in years, I wasn't just his father in name. I was his father in reality, and that was enough. He looked at me before we left. I'm sorry, Dad. And I knew he meant it. We walked out of the diner together. The road ahead wasn't clear, but at least, for the first time, we were walking it side by side.